yeah, my project is called Data Automation. So the goal is to create a system to predict and suggest values for purchase invoice fields in Koble ERP based on the past entered invoices. So first, a little bit about Koble ERP. It's an app used by businesses to keep track of the company's sales, inventory, labor, expenses, financials, etc. And it's designed for companies in industries like equipment and truck repair, building supply, manufacturing, and distribution. So the main customers are businesses that have a lot of products or parts that they manufacture to keep track of. So this is what the Koble ERP app looks like, the home screen. So you can see the sales, labor, financial, inventory, and expenses. And there's a lot of different information that it keeps track of, like the journals, purchase invoices, time tracking, and so it's quite broad. So the problem that I'm trying to address is that there are various tasks in the app that are repetitive and could be time-consuming. So entering purchase invoices, purchase orders, journals, and time cards could have potentially some repetitive tasks that could be avoided. So for example, for a purchase invoice, if a company pays like their electric bill every month, a lot of the information in the invoice is going to be the same, and you can usually just tell what's going to be entered in based on the vendor that the user enters. And then things like journals are going to have a lot of different information, but there will be some fields that are like always the same. And so if you have like a large list of purchase invoices that you're entering, it's going to save a lot of time to put in those values automatically for the user. So I am focusing on purchase invoices, but I hope to expand it to other forms in the future. So this is what the purchase invoice looks like. So the first thing the user enters is the vendor, and then things like the transaction date, the warehouse shipping method, account description, financial account. Those would all be pretty consistent with these regular expense invoices. So this presentation, I'm going to include a chronological summary of what I did. Like Dr. Tate said, I started out with a different project and switched a third of the way through. And then I'll do a demonstration of what I did for the data automation system and purchase invoices. And then I'll show a UI prototype. So I didn't... it's going to require some work on the client, which is a little bit outside my scope, but I made a prototype for what I envision it'll look like. And then future work. What are the next steps for this project? So first, my capstone panel is Dr. Derek Tate. He's our computer science professor. So he sort of guided me through the requirements for the capstone, and we did regular check-ins to show progress and kind of keep me on track. And Jake Ash, my dad, he is a manager and product owner at Koble. So he gave me the project ideas and helped me to sort of brainstorm solutions for how to tackle the problem and helped me to see it from the customer side, because he uses the app himself, so he's familiar with some of the ways it could be improved. And Mohammadjan Abdughafarov is a software developer at SRP. So SRP is a software development company in Tajikistan. They're partnered with Koble. They work on the same software. So this was kind of a cool opportunity for me to make some relationships with some people in Tajikistan, and potentially some good relationships to continue on in the future if I move over. So he helped me with the research process especially, and assisted me with technical issues, because there's a lot of documentation for the Koble framework, but there's still a lot of things that needed to be explained for me to understand how to work with everything. So he assisted me through all of that technical stuff. So my project had 2 phases. I started with a documentation chatbot in the summer of 2023, which is basically a semantic search engine connected to a large language model. You do the search and pass the documentation along with the user's question to a large language model. So a little bit of how semantic search works. So you have the EVMS documentation here that you're searching from the user's question. So that all needs to be embedded. I just used that API. There's plenty of models online that you can use to embed the documentation, and then that gets stored along with the text itself. So then you have the documentation text and the embedding, which encodes the meaning of the different sections. And so then when a user query comes in, you use the same embedding model to embed the query and compare that to your documentation. And I just got the top 3 results and put that in with the user's question. So with this project, I actually started with a proof of concept that Alex Myers, he works for Koble. He sort of created the bare bones of it. He did the embedding and connected it to a large language model. And it worked for a few topics, but the semantic search often didn't return the correct documentation. So it worked, but it was, very bare bones and needed to be optimized. So what I developed, I sort of redid the embedding process. So I converted the HTML to text files and did a little bit of work to make sure that it was still readable. And I also split them into smaller sections by their H2 headings. So by the subheadings in the articles to make it easier to embed the meaning of the articles. And then I did some pre-processing on those text files. So that just takes out some of the stop words like the, but, and, etc., and removes punctuation. So then gets rid of a lot of noise. And then I embedded those text files, saved them in a dictionary as JSON, and then created a bit more of a structured prompt containing the question that the user had and the relevant documentation for the large language model to take in, and then basically just making sure that the large language model can tell what it's supposed to do, what the question is, and what the documentation is there for. So here's just one example. It's just a terminal application. So I asked, how do I configure custom messages? And I return this. This is quite similar to the documentation. It often just rewords it a little bit and changes up the list style a little bit, but it's basically the same. So that was the beginning of my chatbot project. And then in September 2023, I went to Tajikistan and worked there for a month and met with Jake and Mohammedan to discuss next steps for the project. HubSpot, which Koble uses as their platform for documentation, was developing a documentation chatbot called ChatSpot. So we decided to switch from the chatbot project to data automation. And so the rest of my time there at Tajikistan, I began the planning, design, and did some research for data automation. One of the first things I did was some AI research to see if there was a good AI model that could be used to solve the problem. A couple that I looked at were LSTMs, which basically looks at continuous data and basically remembers. It's super complex, but there's a way to remember like the important data points in the continuous data there. But that's more useful for things like predicting text, and would also require that a separate model be made for each for each company that uses the app, which would be a lot of computation. And I also looked at ranking algorithms, which is usually used for recommendation systems like YouTube and Netflix, stuff like that, to recommend videos to their users. It's basically a mechanism that uses supervised learning to assign a score to each item in the list. So in this case, it would look at the history of the purchase invoices and like assign a value to each one. And we decided against that because one, it would require a lot of computing, and I mean we may work on it in the future, possibly try it out, but we wanted to start with something that we knew would work and get all the different parts connected. So we decided to go with just a basic logic approach, and basically just rule-based, returning the values based on some logic on the history. So I got started with learning the Koble framework a little bit. I had worked at Koble the summer before, so I was somewhat familiar with it. But yeah, basically they have the business logic, model designer, and the client code. The model designer app you can use to create like features and entities and pages and dialogues, and then that's all like generated automatically, and you connect to that with the business logic. So this is the first code I wrote for the purchase. I think it was, I started with purchase orders and later switched to purchase invoices. But this basically just gets the history with this line, and then sorts by the most common, here it's predicting the warehouse and shipping method. So it just gets the most common warehouse and shipping method for the vendor that the user entered. And this here is what I ended up with. So this is most of the logic. It's pretty simple. It's the same thing for most fields, just get the most common one. And then for creating a date, there's a little bit more stuff that goes into it. But yeah, it was actually pretty simple for expense invoices. There was pretty clear patterns of, these fields are always the same for this vendor. And then this here is just, it still requires a little bit of code to use the data automation class that I made. But just like getting the data and then passing that into the sort by quantity method. So this here is predicting purchase orders, is predicting the products for the purchase orders. And so some of the things that I did in Model Designer. So here's one example. So suggested products dialog is an entity that I created with a few properties, the purchase doc, and then the selected products and the suggested products. So this was just to create a little dialog to show the products onto the user and then add that to the detail lines when they were selected. And then this is the suggested products property. Most of this I didn't have to deal with, but worked on getting a dialogue that would work for this application. And then created a command which basically creates a button on the dialog, which runs this, which just adds all the selected. It adds all the selected products to the purchase order. So that's a little bit of what I did in Model Designer. And then that makes so this dialog here shows up. And then you can check that, tap the button, and it'll add it. So now I'm going to show a demo for how this works. This is just demo data, but you can see a little bit what it looks like from the client side. So if I go Ohio, so it's gonna put in the transaction date. Whoops, that's not supposed to happen. Let's try that again. All right, so it put in the most common transaction date for Aussie Oak, which isn't super useful for most companies, but if it's repetitive for like expense vendors, it'll make it a lot easier for those specifically. And then it defaults the warehouse and shipping method to the most common one for that vendor, and suggest the most common products for that one. And so you can add that here. And then it, puts in the information for that. So that's what the logic does. And I want to also show a prototype for what I envision it would look like on the user side with some client changes. So you can come in here, create a new purchase order, set the vendor, and then we're thinking there will be a few different ways it'll show up, but if it is something like an expense invoice, it'll be able to fill in most of the properties, and then the user can just like press tab or something to accept that, and then it'll give suggested products for other things to just add that there. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a visual as to what it could look like for the user. So future work for this project, get the UI work finished. I think that's the one of the next steps, is to just make so we can do some user testing with it to see where it needs to be improved and what things it would be useful for. Because I had the data for a real company, but that was just a single company, and so it's hard to tell exactly how it's how useful it's going to be to other customers. And then abstract the code to work with other forms like journals and time cards. So right now it works for purchase invoices and purchase orders, but I want to expand that a little bit. And then do user testing and keep improving the suggestion mechanism.